I stood at the back of Hearthstone Memorial Chapel and watched my brother perform his grief like he was auditioning for a role. Derek sobbed into the shoulders of strangers while our mother stared blankly at the floor. I had returned to Maple Hollow after 7 years expecting silence. Not this spectacle. But the real betrayal wasn't the theatrics. It was the crisp legal folder waiting in Derek's hands, ready to sell the roof right over our dead father's head. The drive back to Maple Hollow took 6 hours, but it felt like I was traveling backward through time. The further north I drove, the tighter my chest became, constricting with a familiar, suffocating pressure I had not felt since I packed my Honda and left 7 years ago. The landscape of Vermont shifted from the open highway to the winding, tree-lined roads that acted as a tunnel into the past. The leaves were turning, a brilliant, violent burn of orange and red against the gray sky, but I could not appreciate the beauty. I was only thinking of my father. I had spent the last week in a fugue state, moving through the logistics of death in a mechanical haze, but now, seeing the sign that read, "Welcome to Maple Hollow, established 1782, the reality hit me. He was gone. The only person in this town who had ever truly seen me was gone. I pulled my car into the gravel lot of Hearthstone Memorial Chapel. It was a sprawling Victorian structure that smelled of damp wood and old hymns. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. My eyes were rimmed with red, and my black dress felt stiff, like armor I did not know how to wear. I took a breath, held it for 4 seconds, and let it out. Claire, just get through the day. I told myself, pay your respects, hug your mother, tolerate Derek, then go home. But as I walked up the stone steps, I realized that tolerating Derek might be a taller order than I had anticipated. The funeral was loud. That was the first thing I noticed. My father was a quiet man. He liked silence. He liked sitting on the porch with a cup of black coffee, watching the birds. He hated fanfare. He hated waste. Yet, the chapel was exploding with flowers. Massive, weeping arrangements of white lilies and orchids lined the aisles, suffocating the air with their cloying, heavy scent. There were silk ribbons with gold lettering draping off easels that displayed blown-up photographs of my father from 30 years ago. And there was Derek. My brother stood at the entrance to the sanctuary, wearing a suit that looked too shiny, the fabric catching the light in a way that screamed cheap luxury. He was shaking hands with people I did not recognize, his voice booming over the hushed murmurs of the attendees. "Thank you for coming," he was saying, gripping the hand of an elderly woman who looked startled by his intensity. "It means so much to us. He was a great man. A titan. We are just trying to survive the loss." He pulled the woman into a hug. I stopped in the vestibule, watching him. He held the embrace a second too long, performing his grief for an audience. He looked up, catching eyes with people over the woman's shoulder, making sure he was being seen. When he saw me, his face shifted. The tragic mask slipped for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flash of annoyance, before he reassembled his expression into one of brotherly devastation. "Claire," he called out, his voice cracking theatrically. "You made it." He abandoned the elderly woman and rushed toward me, arms wide. I stiffened. We had not spoken in 2 years, not since he asked me for $5,000 to cover a sure-thing investment that evaporated 3 days later. "Derek," I said, allowing him to wrap his arms around me. He smelled of peppermint mouthwash and nervous sweat. "I am so glad you are here," he said, loud enough for the back 3 rows to hear. "Mom needs us. We have to be strong." I pulled away gently. "Where is she?" "Front row," he said, wiping a tear that I was not entirely sure was real. "She is not doing well. Claire, she is in shock." I walked past him, down the center aisle. The pews were filled with faces I half remembered. Neighbors, old teachers, people my father had helped over the years. They nodded at me with pity, but I kept my eyes forward. My mother, Elaine Bennett, sat alone in the front pew. She was staring at the closed casket, her posture rigid, She wore a black hat with a small veil. Something out of a movie from the 1950s. It felt like a costume. "Mom?" I whispered, sliding into the pew beside her. She did not turn. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the years had eroded her edges. "Mom, it is Claire." She finally turned her head. Her eyes were dry and glassy, focusing somewhere past my left ear. "You are late," she said. Her voice was flat, no emotion. Just a statement of fact, delivered with the same tone she used to use when I forgot to defrost the chicken. "I am not late. Mom, the service has not started." "Derek has been greeting people for 30 minutes, she said, turning back to the casket. "It looks bad that you were not up there with him." The grief I had been holding back curdled into something sour. 7 years. I stay away for 7 years to build a life where I'm not constantly managed and critiqued. And within 5 minutes, I am being scolded for not participating in Derek's show. "I am here now," I said, fighting the urge to stand up and walk out. The service began. The pastor, a man my father had never mentioned, gave a generic eulogy about community and faith. Then Derek went up to the podium. He spoke for 20 minutes. He told stories that I knew were exaggerated, tales of Dad's business acumen, his toughness, his dominance. He painted our father as a local kingpin of morality, a man who commanded respect. He barely mentioned the dad who taught me to fish, the dad who fixed neighborhood bicycles for free, the dad who read historical biographies in the kitchen while the rest of us watched television. Derek made the funeral about Derek. He talked about the burden of carrying on the family legacy. He talked about the weight on his shoulders. He wept, loudly, into the microphone, forcing the congregation to wait while he composed himself. I looked at my mother. She was still staring at the casket, her face a blank mask. She wasn't crying, she wasn't nodding, she was just existing, completely checked out. When the service finally ended, I felt exhausted. The air outside the chapel was brisk, but I couldn't catch my breath. We were herded into cars for the procession to the reception. The gathering was held at the Wren and Pine Inn, a rustic event space on the edge of town that cost a fortune to rent. I knew this because Dad had complained about the prices there when my cousin got married 5 years ago. He would have hated this. He would have wanted a potluck in the backyard with plastic chairs and cold beer. I found myself standing near the buffet table, picking at a stale triangle of roast beef on white bread. The room was buzzing with low conversation. I was trying to avoid eye contact, hoping to slip out early, when the sound of a spoon clinking against a glass cut through the noise. It was Derek. Of course it was Derek. He was standing on a small riser near the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch. The room fell silent. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," he said. His voice was steady now. The tears from the church miraculously dried. "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate the life of Arthur Bennett. He was a pillar of this town, and he was my hero." There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd. I set my plate down. I had a bad feeling. "But," Derek continued, his face darkening with performative gravity, "losing him has left us with some difficult realities to face. Dad was a proud man. He didn't want anyone to worry, but the truth is, his illness and some outstanding obligations have left the estate in a precarious position." My stomach dropped. What was he talking about? Dad had a pension. He had savings. He lived simply. I watched Derek scan the room, his eyes landing briefly on me before sliding away. "We have to make hard choices to honor his memory properly and to ensure my mother is taken care of," he said, "and that is why, with a heavy heart, I have decided to list the Bennett house for sale immediately." The room gasped softly. I felt the blood drain from my face. Sell the house? Dad had built that house. He had hammered the porch steps himself. He had planted the oak tree in the front yard when I was born. He had told me, explicitly, 1,000 times, "This house is your safety net, Claire. If everything else goes wrong, you always have the house," Derek continued, ignoring the shock in the room. It is the only way to cover the funeral costs and handle the debts Dad left behind. It is a sacrifice, but one we have to make, and since Claire has built her own life so far away, well, we know she has moved on." He gestured vaguely in my direction, effectively framing my absence as consent. I couldn't breathe. I stepped forward, my hands trembling. This was a lie. This was a complete fabrication. I walked toward him. I didn't mean to make a scene, but the words were coming out of my mouth before I could stop them. "What debts?" I asked. My voice was not loud, but in the silent room, it carried. Derek looked down at me from the riser. He smiled. A sad, patronizing smile that made me want to scream. "Claire, we can talk about the details later," he said soothingly. "This isn't the place. You said funeral costs," I said, stepping closer. "Dad prepaid his funeral. He showed me the policy 3 years ago. It was with Mutual of Vermont. Everything was covered. The casket, the plot, the service." The room got very quiet. People were looking back and forth between us. Derek's smile tightened at the corners. There were unexpected overages. "Claire, inflation, things you wouldn't know about because you haven't been here. And the house," I pressed. "Dad promised he would never sell the house. He made me promise to keep it in the family." Derek sighed, looking out at the crowd as if asking them to bear witness to his sister's unreasonableness. Dad wasn't thinking clearly at the end. "Claire, look, I am the executor. I have to do what is best for the estate." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a crisp blue legal folder. It was stamped with the seal of the Maple Hollow Probate Court. "Actually, since you are here," he said, his voice dropping to a register that sounded almost helpful, almost kind. "I need you to sign a consent acknowledgement. It just speeds up the listing process so we can get Mom the liquidity she needs. We have a buyer interested. We can handle this right now and save everyone the pain of dragging it out." He held the folder out to me. A pen appeared in his other hand. I looked at the folder. It was too ready, too prepared. He had this in his pocket during the funeral? While he was crying over the casket, he was carrying the paperwork to sell our home? "I am not signing that," I said. "Claire, please," Derek said, his voice straining with forced patience. "Don't make this harder on Mom. Look at her." I looked. Mom was sitting at a round table near the front, staring into a cup of coffee. She looked frail. "I want to see the will," I said, turning back to Derek. He laughed. A short, sharp sound. "The will? Claire, this is standard procedure. I am the executor. I am handling it. Show me the will where it says you are the executor," I said. "And show me the debt records. Now is not the time," he snapped. The mask slipped again, his eyes narrowing into hard, dark slits. "We are at a funeral reception. Have some respect. I am respecting Dad," I said, by not selling the one thing he loved most. Elaine stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Claire, stop it," she hissed. She walked over to us, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She didn't look at Derek. She looked straight at me, her eyes cold and sharp. "Stop making a scene," she said. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It was the soundtrack of my childhood. Stop making a scene. Don't ask questions. Don't cry in public. Don't challenge Derek. Be quiet. Be invisible. "Mom, he is trying to sell the house," I said, my voice shaking. "He is doing what needs to be done," she said. She reached out and took my arm, her fingers digging in. "Why do you always have to ruin things? You come back after 7 years, and the first thing you do is start a fight?" I stared at her. I wasn't ruining things. I was trying to stop a theft. But looking at her face, I realized she wasn't seeing me. She was seeing a problem, a complication to be smoothed over. "Just sign the paper." "Claire," she whispered harsh and low, "do it for your father." The manipulation was so clumsy, so transparent, yet it still stung. "No," I said. I pulled my arm from her grip. I stepped back. "I am not signing anything until I see the will and the financials." I looked at Derek. He was still holding the pen out, but his face had gone red. "Fine," he said, shoving the folder back into his pocket. "Be difficult. You will sign it eventually. You have no choice. I turned around and walked out of the inn. I could feel the eyes of the entire town burning into my back. I could hear the whispers starting before the door even closed behind me. I got into my car, my hands shaking so hard I couldn't get the key into the ignition on the first try. I sat there for a moment, breathing in the cold air, trying to steady my heart rate. He was lying. I knew it in my bones. The prepaid funeral, the debts, the rush to sell. None of it made sense. I started the car. I wasn't going back to the hotel. I needed to see the house. Briarwood Lane was dark. The streetlights were spaced far apart out here, leaving long stretches of road in shadow. I drove slowly, the tires crunching over fallen leaves. When I pulled up to the house, I slammed on the brakes. I sat in the idling car, staring through the windshield. There was a real estate lockbox hanging from the front doorknob. It was a heavy, gray metal box with a combination dial, a sentry lock, the kind realtors use. Derek had announced the sale 2 hours ago. He said he had decided to list it. But lockboxes don't appear out of thin air. You have to sign a listing agreement. You have to hire an agent. You have to get the hardware. He had done this days ago, maybe weeks, but that wasn't the only thing. The living room curtains were open, and through the glass, I could see light, not the warm, yellow glow of my father's old floor lamps. It was a bright, stark white light. I killed the engine and got out. The wind was biting, cutting through my thin dress. I walked up the driveway, the gravel sounding like gunshots in the silence. I walked up to the front window and peered inside. My breath fogged the glass. I wiped it away and looked again. The living room had been staged. My father's oversized recliner, the one with the duct tape on the armrest, was gone. The stack of National Geographic magazines that always lived on the coffee table was gone. The worn, braided rug was gone. In their place were 2 beige armchairs I had never seen before. A generic glass vase with fake reeds sat on the mantel. And in the corner, a tripod stand held a high-powered photography light, aiming at the fireplace to highlight the stonework. They had been taking listing photos. Before the funeral, I felt a wave of nausea. While I was driving 6 hours to mourn my father, someone had been in here, erasing him, turning his home into a showroom. I reached into my purse and pulled out my key ring. I still had my key. I had kept it on my chain for 7 years. A talisman of the home I could always return to. I jammed the key into the deadbolt. For a second, I was terrified it wouldn't turn, that Derek had changed the locks. But it clicked. The heavy mechanism slid back. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of old paper and coffee that I associated with my dad. It was the chemical scent of cleaning products, lemon pledge and bleach. And underneath that, something else. Smoke. Stale cigarette smoke. I frowned. My father never smoked. He hated it. He wouldn't even let people smoke on the porch. I walked into the hallway. The house was silent, but it felt alive, watchful. I moved into the kitchen. It was spotless. The counters were cleared of the clutter Dad always kept. The jar of loose change, the notepad for grocery lists, the bottle of multivitamins. I opened the junk drawer next to the fridge. It was organized. Rubber bands in a small container, pens aligned by direction, batteries in a neat row. My father's junk drawer was a chaotic disaster of twist ties and mysterious keys. He never organized it. Someone had gone through everything. This wasn't just cleaning. This was searching. It felt predatory, like someone had hunted through his life, item by item, and then sanitized the scene. I walked into the study. This was Dad's sanctuary. His desk was usually a mountain of paperwork. Now, the surface was bare wood. I opened the top drawer. Empty. I opened the file cabinet in the corner. Empty. Panic started to rise in my throat. Where were his papers? His tax returns? The deed? The insurance policies? If Derek was the executor, he had a right to the documents, but to clear them out this fast? And to stage the house? I looked at the bookshelf behind the desk. It was filled with Dad's history books. I ran my hand along the spines. seeking comfort in the familiar titles. My fingers brushed against something loose behind a copy of The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I paused. Dad used to tuck important things behind books. It was his version of a safe, cash for emergencies, birthday cards he wanted to save. I pulled the book out. Wedged against the back of the shelf was a single envelope. I pulled it out. It was unopened. The return address was Redwood Ridge Servicing. I didn't recognize the name. It looked like a bill collector or a loan servicer. I looked at the stamp. It was marked Final Notice in red block letters. But it was the date that made my blood run cold. It was postmarked 4 months ago. If this was a final notice, and it was 4 months old, that meant the problem, whatever it was, had started long before that, and it was unopened. Had Dad missed it? I looked at the shelf again. It was tucked deep. You wouldn't put something there by accident. You would put something there to hide it, or someone else had hidden it. I sniffed the envelope. It had that faint, acrid smell of smoke again. My father didn't smoke. Derek did, or at least, he used to when he was stressed. I stood there in the quiet of the study, the white staging light from the living room casting long, unnatural shadows down the hall. My brother wanted to sell the house immediately. He claimed there were debts. He claimed the funeral costs were a surprise. He had a lockbox on the door and a buyer lined up, and he had tried to force me to sign away my rights at a funeral reception. I gripped the envelope tighter. I wasn't going to sign the consent form. I wasn't going back to my life in the city. Not yet. Derek thought he could bully me. He thought he could use Mom to guilt me into submission. He thought 7 years of distance meant I was weak or indifferent. He was wrong. I shoved the letter into my purse. I walked back to the front door, stepping past the fake beige chairs and the pretentious glass vase. I locked the door behind me, checking it twice. I walked down the driveway to my car. The wind was whipping the trees, making them groan. I took my phone out and typed a note to myself. Redwood Ridge Servicing. I wasn't just going to grieve my father. I was going to find out who killed him. Maybe not literally. The heart attack had been medical fact. But the stress that stopped his heart came from somewhere. I looked back at the house. It looked like a stage set, waiting for the actors to leave so the crew could tear it down. Not on my watch, I whispered. I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving the lockbox hanging there like a threat in the darkness. The morning after the funeral. The sky over Maple Hollow was a bruised purple, heavy with rain that refused to fall. I sat in my rental car outside the Maple Hollow probate court, a brick building that smelled of damp limestone and bureaucracy. My coffee was cold in the cup holder. I had not slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lockbox on my father's door and the staging lights bleaching the warmth out of his living room. I checked my watch. 8 o'clock in the morning. The doors were unlocking. I walked inside, my heels clicking sharply on the linoleum. The clerk was a woman I vaguely recognized from high school, a year or two older than me, with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Her nameplate read, Sarah Jenkins. "Can I help you?" she asked, not looking up from her typing. "I am here to check on the filing status of an estate." I said, "Arthur Bennett." She stopped typing and looked up. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed immediately by that suffocating small-town pity I was beginning to loathe. "Oh, Claire, I am so sorry about your dad. Thank you. Sarah, I need to see the will and the appointment of the executor." She nodded, turning to her computer. "Sure, let me pull it up. Derek was in here the other day asking for forms, so it should be in the system if he filed it." She typed. I waited. My breath held in my chest. Derek had waved that blue folder at the reception like a sword. He had claimed authority. He had demanded I sign a consent form based on that authority. Sarah frowned. She hit the enter key again. She took off her glasses and squinted at the screen. "That is odd," she murmured. "What is it?" "There is nothing here." "Claire." The air in the room seemed to thin. "What do you mean, nothing?" "I mean no will has been filed for probate. No petition for letters of administration. No executor has been appointed." My hands gripped the edge of the counter, but Derek said he was the executor. He had a folder stamped with the court seal. Sarah shook her head slowly. He might have downloaded the forms from our website. Claire, anyone can do that. And he might have come in to get a seal on a document certification or something minor. But as far as this court is concerned, Arthur Bennett's estate is wide open. Derek has no more legal authority to sell that house than I do. Rage, hot and clarifying, rushed through me. He had lied. He had stood in front of our family and friends and lied to my face to pressure me into signing away my rights. If I had signed that consent acknowledgement, I would have effectively handed him the authority he did not have. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I am looking at the docket right now." She said, "It is empty. Thank you." "Sarah," I said. I walked out of the courthouse, the wind biting at my face. He was bluffing. He was trying to sprint to a closing before anyone checked the paperwork. But why? Why the desperation? I needed to follow the money. My next stop was North Mill Community Bank. It was a small branch on Main Street where my father had banked for 40 years. The lobby was quiet. The carpet worn in tracks leading to the tellers. I asked to speak to a manager, a man named Mr. Henderson came out. He was balding, with a kind, anxious face. He had known my father. He shook my hand with both of his palms dry and papery. "Claire," he said softly, "your father was a good man, a steady man. I need to know about the mortgage. Mr. Henderson, Derek claims there are debts. He claims the house has to be sold. Mr. Henderson's face tightened. He took a step back, the professional mask sliding into place. "I cannot discuss the details of the account with you, Claire, not without letters testamentary naming you the administrator. Privacy laws are very strict." "I know," I said, keeping my voice low. "But please, I just came from the courthouse. Derek hasn't filed anything. He is trying to sell the house right now. Claiming he has to pay off the bank. I just need to know if the house is actually in danger. Is it in foreclosure?" He looked at the door to his office, then back at me. He lowered his voice. "The house is not in foreclosure. Claire." "Not yet." "Not yet?" He hesitated. He looked pained, as if he was warring between his duty to the bank and his loyalty to a man who had been a customer for decades. "I can't give you numbers," he whispered, "but I can tell you that the account has seen irregular patterns over the last 18 months. Irregular how? Payments were missed, then caught up in lump sums, then missed again. My father never missed a bill in his life." I said, "Mr. Henderson nodded sadly. "That is what concerned me. But what is more strange is that for the last year, the catch-up payments, they weren't coming from your father's pension account. They were third-party deposits, cashier's checks. From who?" "I can't say. Please." He shook his head. "I have already said too much. But those third-party deposits stopped 3 months ago. That is when the account went red again. I left the bank with a new knot in my stomach. Third-party deposits. Someone else had been paying my father's mortgage for a year. Who? And why stop 3 months before he died? I needed a lawyer, a real one. I drove to the next town over to find the Holloway and Klein Legal Group. I didn't want anyone in Maple Hollow. The town was too small. The loyalties too tangled. Maren Holloway came highly recommended by a friend from law school. Maren was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and a suit that cost more than my car. Her office was modern, minimalist, and cold. Exactly what I needed. I laid it all out for her. The fake executor claim, the lockbox, the mysterious debts, the third-party deposits. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad with a fountain pen. When I finished, she capped the pen and looked at me. "Your brother is playing a dangerous game," she said. Her voice was calm, precise. "Listing a property without legal standing is fraud. If he signs a contract, he is exposing himself to significant liability. He doesn't care about liability." I said, "He cares about speed. He wants the money now. Then we stop him." She said, "Since there is no will filed, you have equal standing as his sibling. I can file a petition for you to be appointed administrator. But that takes time. In the immediate term, We file for an emergency injunction, a temporary restraining order to freeze all assets of the estate, including the real estate. Can we do that today? I can have it filed by this afternoon, she said. It will stop any sale dead in its tracks. But Claire, you need to be prepared. When you file this, you are declaring war. Your brother will not take this well. He already declared war at the funeral. I said, I am just fighting back. After I left Marin's office, I felt a grim sense of purpose. I had a plan, but I needed evidence. I needed to see what else was missing from the house. I drove back to Briarwood Lane. It was midday now, but the house still looked dark. The windows like empty eyes. The lockbox was still there, mocking me. I let myself in. The smell of cleaning chemicals was still strong, but the scent of stale smoke had faded slightly. I went straight to the study. I needed to find the source of those deposits. If Dad had a ledger or bank statements, they would be in the filing cabinet. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the metal cabinet in the corner. It rolled out with a hollow rattle. Empty. I stared at the metal bottom. Nothing. Not a single hanging folder. I checked the top drawer. Empty. I checked the desk drawers again. Nothing. I stood up and looked around the room. Something felt wrong. The walls. I looked at the photos hanging above the desk. There used to be a framed photo of me and Derek at a lake when we were kids. There was one of my parents on their wedding day. There was one of Dad holding a prize trout. They were gone. In their place were frames, generic. Black wooden frames, filled with stock photos. A black and white picture of a bridge. A picture of a random forest. A picture of a sailboat. They were staging props. My stomach turned over. They hadn't just removed the personal clutter. They had removed the family. They were erasing us to make the house look unowned, a blank canvas for a buyer. It was a psychological trick to make the sale easier. I walked into the living room. The mantelpiece was the same. The photos of my graduation. Derek's wedding. The grandkids. All gone. Replaced with generic art prints. Where were they? You don't just throw away 40 years of family history. I went out the back door to the garage. Maybe they were boxed up there. The garage door was open. Inside, I saw a man sweeping the concrete floor. He jumped when he saw me. Russ? It was Russ Calder, my father's handyman. He had been fixing things around our house since I was 10. He was an older man now, his back stooped, wearing his signature grease-stained coveralls. Claire, Lord, you startled me, he said, clutching the broom. I am sorry. Russ, I didn't know anyone was here. He looked down, shifting his feet. I was just finishing up. Derek asked me to clear out the last of the junk. Junk? I asked. Russ, where are the photos? Where are the files from the study? He pointed to a stack of cardboard boxes near the trash bins. I walked over and ripped open the top flap. Inside, jumbled together without any padding or care, were the framed photos. Glass ground against glass. My graduation picture was cracked down the middle. Underneath were loose papers, financial statements, old birthday cards, dumped like trash. Russ, I whispered. Why? He looked miserable. Claire, I am sorry. Derek called me 2 days ago. Said the house was sold. Said the new owners wanted everything out immediately. He paid me $500 cash to clear the personal effects and stage the walls. 2 days ago? That was the day before the funeral. Yeah, he was really nice about it. Actually, said he wanted to spare you the pain of sorting through it. Nice. Derek was never nice unless he wanted something. Did he tell you to take the files? I asked. Russ nodded. He said all the important stuff was already with the lawyer. He said this was just old receipts and junk mail. I looked at the pile. It wasn't junk. It was my father's life. Was he here when you did it? No, Russ said. He called me. Put me on speaker. But what? Well, he wasn't alone. I heard a woman's voice in the background. She was the one giving the specific instructions, telling him to make sure I got the stuff out of the crawl space too. The crawl space? Yeah. Who was the woman? Russ? He hesitated, looking at his boots. Russ, it was your mom. Claire, I know Elaine's voice. She was telling him to make sure I emptied the filing cabinet specifically. She said, quote, "Get rid of the paper trail." The air left my lungs. My mother. I had assumed she was a passive victim in this, a grieving widow being bulldozed by her domineering son, but she was directing him. "Get rid of the paper trail." "Thank you." "Russ," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. I grabbed the box with the papers and the cracked photos. I couldn't stay there. I needed to buy food. The refrigerator at the house was empty, and I refused to eat out. I drove to Briarwood Market, the local grocery store. I walked the aisles in a daze, grabbing apples, bread, coffee. When I walked out of the sliding doors, Derek was waiting for me. He was leaning against his oversized truck, arms crossed. He was wearing sunglasses, though the sky was gray. "You went to the bank," he said. He didn't say hello. I gripped my grocery bags. I did. "And the courthouse," he added. "You are busy. For someone who is supposed to be grieving, I am grieving. Derek, part of grieving is making sure Dad's wishes are honored." He pushed off the truck and took a step toward me. He loomed over me, using his height as a weapon. "You need to stop. Claire, you are embarrassing the family. I have a buyer ready to sign. A cash offer. We can close in 10 days. And where does that money go?" I asked. "To the debts? Or to you?" He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were bloodshot. "You have no idea what is happening," he hissed. "You think you can just waltz back in here and play detective? You are too late. The house is already spoken for. The deal is done." "It is not done," I said. "You are not the executor." I checked. His jaw twitched. "That is a formality. It is the law." Suddenly, his face changed. The sneer vanished, replaced by a warm, dazzling smile. "Mrs. Higgins," he called out, looking over my shoulder. I turned. An elderly neighbor was walking her poodle. Derek stepped around me, his posture relaxing into casual charm. "How are you holding up?" "It was good to see you yesterday." Mrs. Higgins beamed at him. "Oh, Derek, you were so strong. Such a beautiful service. We are hanging in there," he said, resting a hand on my shoulder, a heavy, possessive weight. "Claire is taking it hard, but we are supporting each other." "Right. Sis?" He squeezed my shoulder, hard, painfully hard. I pulled away. Mrs. Higgins didn't notice the tension. She just saw the grieving siblings. She walked on. As soon as she was out of earshot, Derek leaned down, his mouth close to my ear. "Don't fight me on this, Claire. You will lose. And you will ruin Mom in the process." I got into my car and locked the doors. He stood there, watching me, his face a mask of stone. I drove back to the Wren and Pine Inn, where I was staying. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was an unknown number. I picked it up. A text message. "Ask about Sable Ridge Society. Your dad tried to quit." I stared at the screen. Sable Ridge Society. I had never heard of it. Was it a club? A charity? The text was anonymous. I tried to call the number back, but it went straight to a generic voicemail. "Your dad tried to quit." Quit what? The implication was clear. Dad was involved in something structured. And Derek's gambling wasn't just random trips to a casino, it was organized. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and Googled Sable Ridge Society, Maple Hollow. Nothing. No website, no Facebook page. I typed in Sable Ridge. The only result was a luxury hunting lodge about 20 miles outside of town. Sable Ridge Lodge, private events, members only. My phone rang. It was MOURN. I got the order. She said, her voice was brisk. "The judge signed the temporary restraining order an hour ago. It is effective immediately. No sale. No transfer of assets. No listing changes until a hearing can be held in 2 weeks." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Thank you." "MOURN, I am having the sheriff serve Derek with the papers tonight." She said, "Claire, lock your doors. He is going to be furious." I hung up. I had won the first round, but in a small town, a legal victory is a social defeat. By the next morning, the atmosphere in Maple Hollow had shifted. I went to the coffee shop on Main Street, and the silence when I walked in was deafening. People looked at me, then looked away, whispering behind their hands. I heard snippets as I waited for my latte. She sued her own brother, her own flesh and blood. She's sabotaging the sale just to punish them. And her mother's suffering doesn't seem to move her. Derek had been busy. He had spun the narrative. I was the greedy, estranged sister swooping in to freeze the assets, leaving my poor grieving mother and noble brother destitute. I took my coffee and walked to the park by the river. I needed fresh air. Claire? I turned. Tessa Ward was standing there, wearing her blue scrubs. We had been best friends from kindergarten through high school, but we had drifted apart when I left. Tessa, I said. She looked around nervously, as if being seen with me was dangerous. I heard about the injunction. She said, "Yeah, I am the town villain today." She hesitated, then sat down on the bench next to me. "Claire, I shouldn't tell you this, HIPAA and everything, but I saw Derek at the funeral, and I saw your mom." "What is it?" "I work at the medical center. You know that." I nodded. "About 6 months ago, your mom came in. She wasn't a patient. She came to the pharmacy counter. It was slow, so I was up front helping, okay? She was asking questions, hypothetical questions. About what? About interactions. Specifically, she wanted to know how long certain heart medications stay in the bloodstream. And she asked if an overdose of beta blockers would look like a natural heart attack to a coroner. The world stopped spinning. "What?" I whispered. Tessa looked terrified. She played it off like she was writing a mystery novel or something. But Claire, she was taking notes, and she was specific about the brand your dad took. I stared at the rushing water of the river. My father died of a massive heart attack. It was sudden. Everyone said it was natural. He had a history of high blood pressure. But 6 months ago, my mother was asking how to hide an overdose, and now she was telling Derek to destroy the paper trail. And the third-party deposits had stopped 3 months ago. The pieces were clicking together into a picture so horrific I didn't want to see it. Derek had debts, massive debts. Dad had a house, a valuable asset, but Dad wouldn't sell. And someone, maybe the source of the third-party deposits, stopped paying. The pressure mounted, and then Dad died. Tessa put her hand on my arm. "Claire, please don't tell anyone I told you. I could lose my license, but when I heard you were fighting the sale, I thought you should know. It might not be just about the money." I looked at my friend. Her face was pale. "Thank you, Tessa," I said. I walked back to my car. The town looked different now. The quaint brick buildings, the smiling neighbors, the fall leaves. It all looked sinister. I had come here to save a house, but as I unlocked my car door and looked at the text message on my phone, "Ask about Sable Ridge Society," I realized the stakes were much higher. Someone had cleaned the house. Someone had erased the files. Someone had staged the scene. And someone might have stopped my father's heart. I started the engine. The car idled. A low vibration under my hands. I wasn't leaving. I was going to burn their lies to the ground. But first, I had to survive the fire they were setting for me. The conference room at Holloway & Klein was hermetically sealed against the damp Vermont autumn, but I still felt a chill in my bones that the central heating could not touch. Marin Holloway sat across from me, her desk a battlefield of printed spreadsheets and tax records, since Derek had refused to hand over the financial documents. Claiming he was organizing them, we had to rebuild my father's financial life from the outside in. We were archaeologists of debt, brushing away the dirt to find the bones of the estate. "It is worse than I thought," Marin said, sliding a sheet of paper across the mahogany surface. I looked at the document. It was a homeowner's insurance declaration page from a company I had never heard of, Granite State Indemnity. "He switched providers?" I asked. "Dad was with State Farm since 1980. He was loyal to a fault. He didn't just switch providers," Marin said, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. "He switched 2 months before he died." "And look at the coverage limits." I scanned the numbers. The replacement cost coverage had been slashed. The liability limit was the state minimum. The deductible was raised to $5,000. He gutted the policy. I whispered, "He dropped the premium by 60%. MOURN explained, "This isn't a strategic financial move. Claire, this is a desperation move. This is what you do when you're scraping the bottom of the barrel to find an extra $100 a month." I sat back, rubbing my temples. My father, who saved aluminum foil and washed out Ziploc bags, who prided himself on being prepared for any disaster, had left his most valuable asset, the house he built with his own hands, practically unprotected. Why? I asked. If he was broke, why not tell me? I would have paid the premium. MOURN looked at me with a soft, pitying expression that I was beginning to hate. Because shame is a powerful silencer. Claire. And if he was being pressured for money, he might have been trying to free up cash flow without alerting you. But where did the money go? I asked. His pension was steady. The house was paid off. He didn't live extravagantly. That is the question, MOURN said. And until we get access to the actual bank statements, we are guessing. But I did find something else. She pulled up a browser window on her laptop and turned the screen toward me. I did some digging into the property tax records. The taxes are paid, but look at the payment method for the last 2 quarters. I leaned in. The screen showed a scanned receipt from the town clerk's office. Paid by Greywater Outreach Fund. What is Greywater Outreach Fund? I asked. According to their filings, they are a local nonprofit focused on community stabilization and emergency aid, MOURN said. But it is odd. Charities usually give grants to people to pay their bills. They don't usually pay the town clerk directly on behalf of a homeowner unless what? Unless they have a vested interest in the property. I stared at the name. Greywater. It sounded muddy, murky. I left MOURN's office with a list of tasks. She was going to keep hammering the banks for access. Using the temporary restraining order as a crowbar, my job was to find out who the hell these people were. I started with the rumors. In a town like Maple Hollow, information didn't travel on the internet. It traveled over coffee counters and across fence lines. I needed to know about the Sable Ridge Society. The anonymous text message had linked them to my father, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were the sun around which all these other planets, Derek's debt, the insurance, Greywater, were orbiting. I drove to the outskirts of town, where the paved roads turned to packed dirt. I stopped at a gas station that sold bait and tackle, the kind of place where old men sat on upturned milk crates and complained about the weather. I bought a coffee I didn't want and lingered by the counter. "You fellas know anything about the lodge up at Sable Ridge?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. The conversation stopped. The man behind the counter, a guy named Earl who had gone to school with my uncle, wiped his hands on a rag. "Why do you ask?" Earl grunted. "Just curious," I said, thinking of hosting an event. "They don't do weddings," one of the men on the crate said. He didn't look at me. "Private club?" Earl said. "Invite only. Big money from the city. They come up on weekends. Black SUVs. Do locals go there?" I asked. Earl laughed, a dry barking sound. "Only if they are serving the drinks or losing their shirts." "Losing their shirts?" "Poker," the man on the crate said. "High stakes. The kind where you don't play with chips. You play with pink slips." Earl shot the man a warning look. "Shut it, Bill." I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. Pink slips, like car titles or deeds. My father was not a gambler. He played penny ante bridge. He didn't have the stomach for risk, but Derek did. Derek had been betting on football games since high school. I thanked them and walked out, the door chime sounding like an alarm. I sat in my car and texted Tessa. I needed to know more about what she had told me. The medical questions. "Can we talk?" I typed. "Face to face." She replied instantly. "Not at the hospital. Meet me at the trailhead behind the old mill." 20 minutes. The old mill was a ruin of brick and iron by the river, a place where teenagers went to drink and smoke. Now, in the gray daylight, it just looked sad. Tessa was waiting for me, huddled in her oversized puffer coat, her breath clouding in the air. She looked terrified. "Claire, you cannot tell anyone I spoke to you," she said before I even reached her. If Derek finds out, why are you afraid of Derek? I asked. He is my brother, not a mobster. Tessa wrapped her arms around herself. You haven't been here, Claire. He has changed. He owes people, and when people owe that kind of money, they get desperate. And the people he hangs around with, they aren't just local screw-ups anymore. Tell me about the questions Mom asked. I said, please. Tessa took a deep breath. She didn't just ask about the beta blockers. She had a notebook. Claire, she had written down the times your dad took his pills, and she asked me if someone skipped 3 doses and then took a triple dose, would it show up in a standard toxicology screen? I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. She asked that? I whispered. Yes, and I told her it was dangerous, that it could cause cardiac arrest, and she just nodded and wrote it down. She said she was worried he might get confused and double dose by accident. She said she wanted to know the signs. That sounds like a concerned wife, I said, trying to convince myself. Tessa shook her head violently. No, the way she asked. She wasn't asking about symptoms. She was asking about detection. She asked how long the metabolites stay in the system. That is not a question you ask to prevent an accident. That is a question you ask to time something. I looked at the rushing water of the river, my mother, the woman who made blueberry pancakes and knitted scarves. When was this? I asked. 4 months ago, Tessa said, around the time the insurance policy was changed. I drove back into town, my mind reeling. I needed to confront Derek, but as I walked toward the Wren and Pine to get my things, I was intercepted. Maya Larkin, Derek's girlfriend, stepped out of a boutique and blocked my path. She was a petite woman with nervous eyes and hair that was dyed a shade of blonde too bright for her skin tone. She was shivering in a thin cardigan. Claire, she said. Maya, I am not in the mood. Please, she said, reaching out to touch my arm, then pulling back. I just want peace. This family. It is tearing itself apart. Derek is a wreck. He can't eat. He can't sleep. Good, I said coldly. He shouldn't be sleeping. He is trying to steal my inheritance. It is not stealing. Claire, she lowered her voice, looking around the street. He is trying to save everyone. You don't understand the pressure he is under. Then tell me. I said, who is pressuring him? She bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. I can't, but you have to drop the injunction. Please, he already promised the buyer a closing date. I froze. He promised a date? When? October 15th, she whispered. That is next week. I said, that is 3 days before the probate hearing. He thought he could get you to sign the consent form. She said, he thought it would be done by now. If he doesn't deliver the title by the 15th, what happens? Maya? She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine terror in her eyes. It wasn't drama. It was fear. They will hurt him, she said, and not just him. They said they would come for the family. That includes your mom. And you? Who are they? She shook her head, backing away. Just let him sell the house. Claire, it is just wood and brick. It is not worth your life. She turned and ran down the sidewalk, her heels clacking unevenly. I stood there, the date burning in my mind. October 15th. He was on a deadline. That explained the rush. That explained the panic. I needed to find something concrete. I couldn't go to the police with rumors and vibrations. I needed proof. I remembered something. Every month, my father wrote a check for $65 to Greenlock Storage. It was one of the few bills he still paid by check because he didn't trust their online portal. I drove to the facility, a row of orange metal doors behind a chain-link fence on the south side of town. The office smelled of stale coffee and dust. I am here to check on Arthur Bennett's unit, I said to the teenager behind the counter. Unit 42. He tapped on his keyboard. That unit is closed. Ma'am, closed? Yeah. Account was canceled and cleared out. When? He squinted at the screen. September 5th. My father died on August 30th. Who closed it? I asked. System says, Derek Bennett. He paid the final balance and signed the vacate order. Did he take everything? I guess so. The unit is marked available. Can I see it? Please, I just want to make sure nothing was left behind. The kid shrugged. Sure, it is empty. Though, he walked me back. He rolled up the orange door with a clang that echoed off the metal roof. The unit was swept clean, a concrete box. I stepped inside. The air was dry. Wait, I said. I looked at the back corner. There was a shadow there, something wedged between the support beam and the wall. I walked over. It wasn't a shadow. It was a heavy, red metal toolbox, a craftsman. Hey, I said, there is something here. The kid looked at his clipboard. Weird. Derek signed the unit empty form. I tried to lift it. It was incredibly heavy, and it was locked. A heavy padlock secured the latch. This isn't Derek's, I said. I recognized the scratches on the lid. This was my father's good toolbox, the one he never let us touch. I am taking this. I said, technically, if it is abandoned property. The kid started. I turned on him, and I must have looked like a banshee because he took a step back. My father died 3 weeks ago. This is his. I am taking it. Go ahead, he squeaked. I hauled the chest to my car, straining under the weight. I didn't go back to the hotel. I went straight to MOURN's office. We need bolt cutters, I said, walking past her receptionist. 10 minutes later, MOURN and I stood in her office with the toolbox on her desk. She had borrowed a pair of bolt cutters from the building superintendent. Do you want to do the honors? She asked. I nodded. I took the heavy handles. I positioned the jaws over the padlock shackle. I squeezed. There was a sharp crack, and the lock fell onto the desk. I took a deep breath. I threw the latch and opened the lid. It wasn't tools. It was paper. Stacks and stacks of paper, wrapped in rubber bands, and right on top, 2 envelopes. One was addressed to me, Claire. The other was labeled, If anything happens to me. I picked up the letter addressed to me. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. Read it, MOURN said softly. I tore open the envelope. It was handwritten. My father's blocky, all caps printing. Claire, if you are reading this, I am gone, and if you found this box, it means you were smart enough not to trust what they told you. I have made a mess of things. Bear. I tried to help your brother. I thought it was just a phase. I thought if I bailed him out one last time, he would get straight. But it is not a phase. It is a sickness, and I let it infect our home. They want the house. They have been trying to get me to sign it over for a year. A group called the Society. Derek is in deep with them. I have paid them everything I have. Claire, the savings are gone. The retirement is gone. I even borrowed against the life insurance, which I know I promised I wouldn't do. But I never sold the house. That was my line in the sand. That house is yours. I signed a deed transferring it to you 6 months ago, but I was afraid to file it because I didn't want them to come after you. It is in this box. I am scared. Claire, not of dying, but of what they might do to get what they want. Watch your mother. She loves Derek too much. She has blinded herself to what he is. Do not trust the person who keeps track of the mail. Forgive me. Love, Dad. I lowered the letter. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and fast. He didn't sell it. I choked out. He fought them. MOURN was already digging through the box. She pulled out a document. Here it is, she said, her voice sharp with professional victory. A quitclaim deed, signed, notarized, and dated 6 months ago, granting the property to Claire Bennett. Is it valid if it wasn't filed? I asked, wiping my eyes. In this state? Yes. MOURN said, it is valid between the parties upon delivery, by leaving it for you in this box. He delivered it. It takes precedence over any unfiled will. Claire, you own the house. You have owned it for 6 months. I looked at the second envelope, the one labeled, If anything happens to me. I opened it. It didn't contain a letter. It contained bank deposit slips, dozens of them. They were all for deposits into my father's account, ranging from $2,000 to $5,000. The source was listed on the carbon copies, Greywater Outreach Fund, and there was a sticky note attached to the bundle, not a charity, a cover. They wash the money through the donations. Derek brings the cash. They write the checks. It makes the gambling money look like income. I looked at MOURN. Money laundering. I said, Sable Ridge is the casino. MOURN said, her eyes widening. Greywater's the laundry. They take the illegal gambling profits, run them through the non-profit as anonymous donations, and then pay out grants or vendor payments to the winners. Or in this case, they were funneling money into your father's account to pay the mortgage so the bank wouldn't foreclose, keeping the asset safe until they could force him to sign it over. They were paying the mortgage to keep their collateral safe. I realized, and when Dad wouldn't sign, they stopped paying. They let the pressure build, and then he died. I said, conveniently. MOURN looked at the clock. Claire, this is major. This is RICO territory. We need to go to the state police. Not yet. I said, why? Because Derek is involved. If we go to the police now, he goes to prison for 20 years. He might deserve it. MOURN said gently, maybe. I said, but I need to look him in the eye first. I need to know how much he knew. I pulled up the local news on my phone. I had seen a flyer at the coffee shop earlier. Tonight at the Maple Hollow Civic Hall, Greywater Outreach Annual Gala. They are all going to be there. I said, Derek, Mom, the people from the charity, Claire, don't. MOURN warned, it is dangerous. I stood up, putting the deed in my purse. I am not going to fight them with a lawyer tonight. MOURN, I am going to walk in there and let them know that I know. I want to see them sweat. I went back to the hotel and changed. I didn't have a gala dress, but I had the black dress from the funeral. It was fitting. I was still mourning. After all. The Civic Hall was lit up with golden string lights. Expensive cars lined the street. I walked past the check-in table, ignoring the woman who asked for my ticket. I just kept walking. The ballroom was full of the town's elite. The mayor was there. The bank manager, Mr. Henderson, was there. And in the center of the room, holding court near the buffet, was Derek. He looked triumphant. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He was laughing, a champagne flute in his hand. Beside him stood my mother, wearing a silver gown, looking elegant and completely composed. She didn't look like a grieving widow. She looked like the Queen Mother. I walked into the center of the room. Derek saw me first. His smile faltered, then froze. He lowered his glass. Elaine followed his gaze. Her face went rigid. I stopped 10 feet away from them. The crowd around us sensed the tension and parted slightly, creating a small circle of silence. Claire, Derek said, his voice tight. What are you doing here? I just wanted to support the charity, I said, my voice carrying clearly over the soft jazz music. Greywater does such interesting work. Derek's eyes darted to the side. You should go. Why? I asked. I'm just fascinated by how it works, how the donations come in anonymously, how the grants go out. It is a very complex system, isn't it? Derek? His face drained of color. Elaine stepped forward. Claire, you are drunk. Come with me. I am stone cold sober. Mom, unlike Dad was when you were asking about his medication timelines. Elaine flinched as if I had slapped her. We know, I said, looking from Derek to Elaine. I found the toolbox. I have the deed. The house is mine, and the game is over. Derek stepped toward me, his hand reaching out. Claire, shut up. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. I said, I am saving our home. A man stepped out of the shadows behind Derek. He was tall, wearing a dark suit that didn't look like a rental. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow. He didn't look like a donor. He looked like a shark. He placed a hand on Derek's shoulder. Is there a problem here? Mr. Bennett? The man asked. His voice was smooth, like oil on water. Derek looked at the man, and I saw him tremble. No, Derek stammered. No problem. My sister was just leaving. The man looked at me. His eyes were dead. There was no emotion in them, just a cold calculation. I suggest you listen to your brother, Ms. Bennett, the man said. Grief can make people unstable. I held his gaze. I wasn't afraid. I was furious. I am leaving. I said, but I am not done. I turned and walked out. I felt their eyes on my back. I felt the heat of the room fading into the chill of the night air. I burst out the front doors and down the steps. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I had poked the bear. I had told them I had the deed. I reached my car and fumbled for my keys. I had a feeling of being watched. Primal instinct. I turned around. Standing at the top of the stairs, in the shadows of the portico, was the man in the dark suit. He was watching me. Just standing there. Then, he turned and melted back into the hall. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down. Another text from the unknown number. You are digging in the wrong place. Start with the mailbox. I stared at the screen. The mailbox? I had checked the mail. There was nothing there. But the letter. Dad's letter. Do not trust the person who keeps track of the mail. And the first clue, the Redwood Ridge letter wedged behind the books, had been hidden. I looked back at the hall, glowing with light and corruption. I wasn't digging in the wrong place. I was just digging in the only place they wanted me to look. They wanted me to look at the money. But the mechanism of the crime was simpler. The mailbox. I got into my car and drove. I wasn't going to the hotel. I was going to Briarwood Lane. I needed to see the mailbox. The drive from the Civic Hall to Briarwood Lane was a blur of adrenaline and high beams cutting through the pitch-black Vermont night. The text message burned in my mind. Start with the mailbox. It seemed too simple. A mailbox was just a metal tunnel for bills and catalogs. But in the architecture of a conspiracy, it was the gatekeeper. If you controlled the flow of information entering a house, you controlled the reality of the people living inside it. I pulled up to the curb, the tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. The house was dark, a looming shadow against the starless sky. I didn't go to the front door. I went to the post at the end of the driveway. It was a standard wooden post, weathered gray by decades of snow and rain. The box itself was black metal, the red flag lowered. I took my phone out and used the flashlight to inspect the structure. At first glance, it looked normal. But then I crouched down to look at the underside, where the box was mounted to the horizontal arm of the post. The wood there was different. The arm of the post was not the original rot-resistant cedar my father had installed 20 years ago. It was pine, cheap, untreated pine that had been stained quickly to match the gray of the vertical post. The stain was uneven, darker in the grain, and it hadn't fully cured. It felt slightly tacky to the touch. I shone the light on the screws. They were bright silver, gleaming and unblemished. Phillips heads, no rust, no oxidation. These screws had been driven in recently. A week ago? 2 weeks? Someone had replaced the mounting arm and the box, then tried to age it to look like it had always been there. Why replace a mailbox? Because you didn't have the key to the old one, or because you wanted to divert the stream without anyone noticing the lock had changed. I stood up, the cold wind whipping my hair across my face. My father had written, "Do not trust the person who keeps track of the mail." I had assumed he meant figuratively. I had assumed he meant whoever sorted the pile on the kitchen counter. But this was literal. The physical infrastructure of our communication had been hijacked. I took a picture of the fresh screws and the stained wood. Then I got back in my car. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. I was going to prepare for war. The next morning, I was sitting in Marin Holloway's conference room before the receptionist had even turned on the coffee machine. Marin walked in 10 minutes later, looking fresh and sharp, carrying a file that looked significantly thicker than it had the day before. "You look like hell." "Claire," she said, setting her bag down, "I found fresh screws on the mailbox." I said, "And I received a text telling me to look there." Marin paused, her hand hovering over her laptop. She sat down slowly. "That aligns with what came in this morning," she said. She opened the file and slid a document across the table. It was a photocopy of a United States Postal Service change of address form. "We subpoenaed the postmaster yesterday after you found the hidden letter." She said, "Look at the date." I looked. The request had been filed on July 15th, 6 weeks before my father died. It requested that all first-class mail, certified letters, and financial statements be forwarded from the Briarwood Lane address to a P.O. box, at Maple Hollow Station. Box 412, July 15th. I whispered. That is when the third-party deposit stopped. That is when the pressure on Dad ramped up. Look at the signature, MOURN said. I looked at the bottom of the form. The signature read, Arthur Bennett. It was a good attempt. The slant was right. The capital A was looped the way Dad did it, but the tremor was missing. My father had a slight essential tremor in his right hand that made his lines waver microscopically. This signature was smooth. Confident, fluid. It is a forgery. I said, a good one, but it is not him. And here's the kicker. MOURN said, we pulled the ownership of PEO Box 412. It is not registered to Arthur Bennett. Who is it registered to? Elaine Bennett. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mother. She didn't just redirect the mail. MOURN said, she curated it. She filtered out the foreclosure warnings, the overdue notices, the letters from the insurance company about the policy changes. She created a bubble of silence around your father so he wouldn't know how deep the water was until he drowned. I stood up and walked to the window. The town of Maple Hollow looked peaceful below, the church spire poking through the turning leaves. It was all a lie. I have to talk to her. I said, Claire, MOURN warned, if she is complicit in fraud, she is my mother. MOURN, I have to give her one chance to tell the truth before we burn this whole family down. I found Elaine at her condo. She had moved out of the big house a year ago, claiming it was too much work to clean. But now I wondered if that was just part of the separation of assets, a way to distance herself from the sinking ship. She was sitting in her sunroom, drinking tea and watching a talk show. When I walked in, she didn't smile. She looked tired. The performance she had put on at the gala the night before had evaporated, leaving a brittle, frightened woman in its wake. Claire, she said, I didn't expect you. I sat down opposite her. I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I just put the copy of the change of address form on the glass coffee table between us. Mom, I said, why? She looked at the paper. She didn't pick it up. Her hand trembled as she reached for her teacup. I don't know what that is, she said. Don't, I said. My voice was soft, but it was as hard as iron. Don't lie to me anymore. The signature is fake. The box is in your name. You stole Dad's mail. You hid the notices. She set the cup down with a clatter. Tea sloshed onto the saucer. I was protecting him, she cried out, her voice cracking. You don't understand. Claire, you were gone. You were in the city living your perfect, independent life. You didn't see him. See him what? See him falling apart, she sobbed. Derek. Derek was in trouble. Real trouble. People were calling the house. Men were driving by. Your father was going to have a stroke from the stress. I had to stop the calls. I had to hide the letters. If he knew how bad it was. So you let him die in the dark? I asked. You let him think everything was fine while you and Derek stripped the equity out of his life? I did what I had to do, she screamed. A tear tracked through her foundation. I am a mother. I had to save my son. And sacrifice your husband? I asked. And sacrifice me? She wiped her face aggressively. You are strong. Claire, you always have been. You can take care of yourself. Derek is fragile. He needs help. He is a 40-year-old man. Mom, he is not a child. He is a predator, and you are holding the door open for him. She looked away. Her jaw set in a stubborn line. I realized then that I wasn't going to get a confession. I wasn't going to get an apology. To admit she was wrong would be to admit that she had chosen one child over the other, and that she had betrayed the man she had been married to for 4 decades. Her mind couldn't handle that weight, so she had constructed a fortress of denial. I stood up. I took the paper back. You didn't protect Dad. I said, you isolated him, and I am going to prove it. Claire, please, she whispered, her voice shifting from anger to pleading. Don't destroy your brother. He is all I have left. I looked at her, really looked at her. You have me. Mom, I said, or you did. I walked out. I felt a severance, a physical snapping of the cord that bound us. I was an orphan now. Not because they were dead, but because they had become strangers. The retaliation came 3 hours later. I was back in MOURN's office when her paralegal rushed in, looking flustered. "New filing from Derek's attorney," she said, handing a thick stack of documents to MOURN. MOURN scanned the first page, her eyebrows shooting up. "Well," she said, "he is taking the gloves off." "What is it?" "He has filed a motion to disqualify you as a potential administrator," MOURN said. "He is claiming that you are financially unstable and estranged from the family unit. He claims that your sudden interest in the estate is predatory." I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Financially unstable? I have a savings account. I have a job. Derek is the one with gambling debts. He is projecting," MOURN said, "but it is effective. He is trying to muddy the water. He wants the judge to think this is just a squabble between two greedy siblings, rather than a case of fraud. It gives the court a reason to appoint a neutral third party, or to default to the person who has been caring for the parents. Him, there is more." The paralegal said, "He filed an affidavit stating that the house is a liability and needs to be liquidated immediately to prevent further loss to the estate." MOURN smiled, a cold, shark-like smile. "Perfect," she said. "Perfect?" I asked. "He just put it in writing," she said. "He claims the house is a liability, but in his previous filing, the one where he tried to get the emergency power of attorney last week, he claimed the estate was solvent and robust." She pulled a document from her own file. "See? Inconsistency. If we can prove he is lying to the court about the solvency of the estate, we destroy his credibility. And Claire, we found the life insurance." I leaned forward. "Mutual of Vermont?" "Yes. Policy number ending in 678. Face value of $50,000. "Where is it?" "It was paid out on September 10th, MOURN said. 10 days after your father died. Did it go to the funeral home?" "No. The funeral home has a pending invoice for $12,000. They haven't been paid a dime. So where did the $50,000 go?" "It was deposited into a joint checking account at North Mill Bank. Account holders, Elaine Bennett and Derek Bennett. And the balance?" 3 days later, on September 13th, there was a withdrawal of $45,000, cashier's check. Made out to who? "We don't know yet. MOURN said the bank redacted the payee on the statement copy, but we can guess. Sable Ridge." I said, "Or Greywater Outreach." MOURN corrected. "Same beast, different head. So they stole the funeral money." I said, "They let Dad's friends think he was destitute. They let Derek stand up there and beg for sympathy, while they had $50,000 sitting in an account that they immediately funneled to a casino." "It is theft," MOURN said. "Plain and simple. Conversion of estate assets. And since you have the quitclaim deed, that house wasn't theirs to leverage. We have them." I said, "Not yet," MOURN cautioned. "We have smoke. We need the fire. We need to know exactly what Derek is hiding in that house." I returned to the Wren and Pine Inn to change clothes. My head was pounding. As I walked through the lobby, a young man with a camera bag stood up from one of the velvet armchairs. "Claire Bennett?" he asked. I stopped, defensive. "Yes, I am Jude Mercer," he said. He looked harmless. Flannel shirt, messy hair, maybe 25 years old. "I am the photographer." "The photographer?" "For the house," he said. "Derek hired me to shoot the listing photos last week, the ones you saw." I felt a spike of anger. "You are the one who staged my father's living room." Jude held up his hands. "I am sorry. It is just a job. But something happened that didn't sit right with me. I heard you were fighting the sale, and I thought you should know." "What?" I asked. "When I was shooting the basement," Jude said, "there is this crawlspace door. You know the one? Under the stairs?" I nodded. It was a small plywood door that led to the uninsulated void under the kitchen. It was boarded up. Jude said, "It looked ugly." So I took a photo of the main room, and the door was in the frame. Derek was watching me like a hawk. When he saw that image on my camera screen, he freaked out. Freaked out how? He got aggressive. He told me to delete it. He said, "Don't show that door. Delete it from the memory card right now." He made me format the card and start over. Why? I asked. It is just a crawl space. That is what I thought, Jude said. But then he asked me to help him move a shelf in front of it, a big metal shelving unit. He wanted it blocked. He was sweating. Claire, like panic sweating. I looked at Jude. Thank you, I said. He nodded. Good luck. I think your brother is into some bad stuff. I didn't wait. I drove straight to the house. I had the key. I had the deed. This was my house. I let myself in. The silence was heavy, oppressive. I went straight to the kitchen door and down the wooden steps into the basement. The basement was damp and smelled of earth and that lingering, sweet scent of spray paint. I looked at the spot under the stairs. Jude was right. A heavy metal shelving unit, loaded with old paint cans and jars of nails, had been dragged in front of the crawlspace access. I shoved the shelf. It was heavy, scraping loudly against the concrete floor. I gritted my teeth and pushed harder, my heels slipping. It moved enough for me to squeeze behind it. I shone my flashlight on the crawlspace door. It was a piece of plywood, maybe 3 feet high, but the paint on it was fresh, a stark, glossy white that didn't match the surrounding gray concrete. I touched it. It was dry, but soft, tacky, freshly painted. To cover what? Scratches? Marks? I looked at the edges. There were 4 screws holding the plywood panel in place. I ran upstairs to the kitchen, grabbed a screwdriver from the junk drawer, which was still eerily organized, and ran back down. I unscrewed the panel. 1, 2, 3, 4. The plywood fell forward with a thud. I shone the light into the darkness of the crawlspace. It was a dirt floor, filled with cobwebs and insulation batting hanging from the joists. But right in the front, bolted to the side of the main support beam, was a metal box. It wasn't a standard lockbox. It was a heavy-duty security box, the kind you might see in a bank van. It was gray, industrial, and bolted directly into the wood of the house's frame. I reached in. It was locked, a circular keyway. I didn't have a circular key. I checked the beam around it. There were scratches in the wood, desperate scratches. Someone had installed this quickly and violently. This was what Derek was hiding. This was what the executor folder was protecting. I took a photo of the box. I took a photo of the hidden location. I went back upstairs and called MOURN. I found it. I said, "There is a lockbox bolted to the frame of the house in the crawlspace. Don't touch it." MOURN said, "If you open it without a witness, Derek will claim you planted whatever is inside. We need to open it." "MOURN, the hearing is in 3 days. Bring it to court." MOURN said, "Or better yet, we force Derek to bring the key. He won't bring it. Then we make him look guilty for refusing. I am filing a motion to compel production of the executor folder and all keys associated with the property. We will serve him tomorrow." The next day, MOURN served Derek with the motion. His response was to stall. He showed up at MOURN's office with a stack of papers, but no folder. He looked haggard. His eyes were dark circles, his skin sallow. He threw the papers on the desk. "There," he said, "that is everything." MOURN picked up the top sheet. It was a photocopy of a will and testament. "This is a copy." "Derek," MOURN said, "where is the original?" I misplaced it." Derek stammered, "But that is a certified copy. Look at the stamp." MOURN pulled a magnifying glass from her drawer. She hovered it over the seal in the corner of the photocopy. "Derek," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "the seal of the Maple Hollow Probate Court has a maple leaf in the center. This seal has an acorn." Derek froze. "This is a template you downloaded from the internet," MOURN said, "and you bought a rubber stamp online. This is forgery." "Derek, this is a felony." "It is not," he shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "Dad signed it." "There is no witness signature," MOURN pointed out, "and the date is from 3 years ago. Yet you claim he wrote it last month." Derek grabbed the papers back. "You are twisting everything." He stormed out. "We have him," MOURN said. "He is cracking." But the community wasn't seeing the cracks. They were seeing a martyr. Sunday morning, I went to St. Alders Community Church. I wasn't religious, but I knew Derek would be there. The service was packed. When I walked in, heads turned. The whispering started immediately. It sounded like a hive of angry bees. I took a seat in the back pew. Derek was in the front row, kneeling. He had his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. He was praying. Publicly, loudly. Elaine was next to him, her hand on his back. The pastor, Reverend Miller, began his sermon. He spoke about forgiveness and the prodigal child. He didn't use my name, but he didn't have to. He talked about how some people turn their backs on family, how greed can harden a heart. He was talking about me. I felt the eyes of the congregation boring into me, to them. I was the city girl who came back to strip the assets from her poor, grieving brother. They didn't know about the forgery. They didn't know about the life insurance theft. They only knew the story Derek had told them, that he was selling the house to pay Dad's debts, and I was stopping him out of spite. After the service, Derek stood on the church steps. People lined up to hug him. "Stay strong. Derek, we are praying for you. Derek, don't let her get to you." He soaked it up. He nodded, wiping his eyes. He looked at me, standing by my car, and gave me a look of such pure, distilled hatred that it chilled my blood. Then, he turned to Mrs. Gable, the choir director, and smiled bravely. "It is hard," he said loud enough for me to hear, "but I just want to do what Dad wanted." I got in my car. I was shaking, not with fear, but with rage. He was using the church, using our neighbors, using our father's memory as a shield for his crimes. I couldn't wait for the court hearing. I couldn't wait for the judge to decide. I needed to know what was in that box. That night, the house was empty. Derek was staying at Elaine's condo. I parked my car 2 streets over and walked through the woods to the backyard. I entered through the basement bulkhead doors, prying the latch with a garden trowel I found in the shed. I moved silently through the darkness. I didn't turn on a light. I used the flashlight on my phone. Keeping the beam low, I went to the crawl space. I squeezed behind the shelf. The box was there, cold and gray. I didn't have the key, but I had spent 7 years living in a city where I locked myself out of my apartment more times than I cared to admit. I had learned a few things. I pulled a bobby pin from my hair. I pulled a tension wrench, a small, flat piece of metal I had filed down from a wiper blade insert, out of my pocket. I had made it that afternoon. I inserted the tension wrench. I inserted the pin. I raked the pins. Nothing. I tried again. My breath was loud in the confined space. Above me, the house creaked. Click. The cylinder turned. I held my breath. I pulled the door of the box open. Inside, there was a stack of papers and a small, silver USB drive. I pulled the papers out first. They were cashier's checks, 5 of them. $10,000, $10,000, $10,000, $10,000, $5,000, $45,000 total. The date on the checks was September 13th. This was the life insurance money. Derek hadn't paid the debt yet. He was hoarding it. Why? I looked at the payees. The checks were blank. He had withdrawn the money as cashier's checks, leaving the payee line empty so they could be used like cash. Untraceable, portable, and underneath the checks was the flash drive. It had a piece of masking tape on it. On the tape, in my father's shaky, unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words. Claire, do not trust her. Her, not him, her. My heart stopped. Dad hadn't just been afraid of Derek. He had been afraid of Elaine. I clutched the drive in my hand. I had the evidence. I had the money. I started to back out of the crawl space. Then I heard it. The sound of the front door opening upstairs. Heavy footsteps on the hardwood floor. "Claire?" a voice called out. It wasn't Derek. It was the man from the gala. The shark in the suit. I froze in the darkness. The smell of fresh paint and old earth filling my nose. The footsteps stopped directly above my head. "Come out." "Claire," the man said, "we know you are down there." I gripped the flash drive. I wasn't coming out, not without a fight. I held my breath in the suffocating darkness of the crawl space. My hand clamped over my mouth. The floorboards above me groaned under the weight of the man in the suit. He walked slowly, methodically, pausing every few feet to listen. I could hear the muffled thud of his heels striking the hardwood, a rhythm of predatory patience. He knew I was here. He just didn't know exactly where. After what felt like an hour, but was likely only 10 minutes. The footsteps retreated toward the front door. The latch clicked, the heavy oak door closed. I didn't move. I waited another 20 minutes, shivering against the cold earth, clutching the flash drive so hard the plastic edges bit into my palm. Only when the silence had settled back into the house, heavy and undisturbed, did I crawl out. I scrambled through the basement, out the bulkhead doors, and sprinted to my car, hidden 2 streets away. I didn't go back to the hotel. I drove until the sun came up, parking in the lot of a 24-hour diner on the interstate, watching the door, waiting for Marin's office to open. At 8 o'clock in the morning, I placed the flash drive on Marin's desk. "We have to watch this," I said. My voice was raspy from lack of use. Marin didn't ask questions. She plugged the drive into her laptop. A window popped up. It contained folders labeled by year, scanned PDF bank statements, and a single video file named Truth, MP4. Marin clicked the video. My father's face filled the screen. I gasped. He looked terrible. His skin was the color of old parchment, and his eyes were sunken, rimmed with dark, bruised circles. He was sitting in his study, the same study where I had found the hidden letter. The background was dark, illuminated only by the desk lamp. "Claire," he said. His voice was a wheeze. "If you are seeing this..." I ran out of time. He looked over his shoulder at the door. "Paranoid. I thought I could fix it," he whispered. "I thought if I paid them off, they would let Derek go. But they don't let you go. Sable Ridge. It isn't just a card game. It is a washing machine." He held up a trembling hand. "Derek isn't just gambling. Claire, he is working for them. He is a collector. He picks up the cash from the players who can't wire it. He drives it to the lodge. They use the non-profit to clean it. But Derek, God help him, he started skimming. He took cash from the drops to play at the tables. He owes them money he lost, and he owes them the money he stole." My father wiped his mouth. "They want the house because it is a clean asset. They want to buy it through the shell company, inflate the value, and borrow against it. They want to turn our home into a laundromat. I told them no. I told Elaine no. But she says we have to save him." The video cut to black. I sat back in the leather chair, feeling sick. "He wasn't just a degenerate gambler," I said softly. "He was an embezzler. He was stealing from the mob, and your father was the collateral." Marin said. She was typing furiously. "This changes the strategy. Claire, this isn't just probate fraud. This is criminal conspiracy. Derek was acting as a bagman for an organized crime ring. We went through the scanned documents. They were meticulous records of cash drops. Dates, times, amounts. August 4th, $12,000. August 10th, $8,000. And then, a column for shortfall. Derek had been short on every drop for the last 6 months. He was digging a hole so deep he could see the center of the earth. I said, "I need to find Maya." I said, standing up. Maya Larkin worked at a high-end boutique on Main Street called the Gilded Lily. I walked in just as she was unlocking the front door. The bell chimed, and she jumped, dropping her keys. "We need to talk." "Maya," I said. She looked at me, her eyes darting to the street. "I can't." "Claire," Derek said. "I know what Derek is." I interrupted. "I know he's a collector. I know he was skimming. And I know about the shortfall." Her face crumbled. She quickly locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. "Come to the back," she whispered. We sat in a cramped break room surrounded by boxes of scarves and handbags. Maya was shaking. "He didn't mean to take it," she said, her voice thin and reedy. He thought he could win it back. He thought if he could just hit one big pot, he could replace the money in the bag before he got to the lodge. But he never won. I said, "He lost everything," she said. And then the threat started. Not just broken legs. Claire, they threatened to expose him. They have video of him taking the cash. If they release it, he goes to prison for grand larceny. So he sold my father out? He didn't want to. Maya cried. He begged them for time. But your mom? What about my mom? Maya looked down at her hands. Elaine has been the one fixing it, for years. Every time Derek got in a hole, Elaine found a way. She took out a second mortgage on the condo. She cashed out her IRA. She has been moving money around to cover his tracks since he was 25. She is not a victim, I realized. She is the architect of his survival. There was an incident at the lodge, Maya said softly. Last winter, Derek was short $5,000. The floor manager. He took Derek into the back office. When Derek came home, his ribs were taped. He couldn't breathe without crying. Elaine saw him. That was the night she decided the house had to be sold. She said she wouldn't let them kill her boy. She would rather kill her husband. I said bitterly. Maya didn't answer. She just wept. I left the shop with a new understanding of the dynamic. It wasn't that Derek was a monster and Elaine was a fool. It was that they were a closed loop of dysfunction. Elaine needed to be the savior as much as Derek needed to be saved. And my father and I were just resources to be consumed in their fire. My phone rang. It was MOURN. Get to the office, she said. I found something in the archives. When I arrived, MOURN had a dusty file box on her desk. She held up a piece of paper that smelled of smoke. I was looking into the history of your father's estate planning. She said, before he got sick, he used a firm called Briar and Stone. I remember them. I said, they were on the corner of Elm. The building burned down last year. Exactly, MOURN said. A minor electrical fire. Destroyed the records room. But not everything. I tracked down the bankruptcy filing for the firm. They had a digital backup index. She pointed to a line on the paper. Last will and testament. Arthur Bennett. Dated January 15th. 2 years ago. There was a will. I said, yes, and the index lists the primary beneficiary of the real property, the house on Briarwood Lane, as Claire Bennett. I felt a lump in my throat. He had left it to me. He had always intended for me to have it, but the original is gone, MOURN said, burned in the fire. Convenient. I said, too convenient, but here's the thing. I found the paralegal who worked that file. Her name is Nora Phelps. She's retired now, living in a cottage out by the lake. She kept personal notes. We drove to the lake. Nora Phelps was a bird-like woman in her 70s, surrounded by 4 cats and the smell of lavender. She served us tea in chipped porcelain cups. I remember the Bennetts, she said, stroking a tabby cat on her lap. Your father was a sweet man, very quiet, but your mother was a force. Tell us about the will. Nora. I said, Mr. Bennett came in alone. Nora said, he was very clear. He wanted the house to go to you. He said you were the only one who would keep it standing. He left the insurance and the cash to Elaine, but the house was yours. What happened to the document? MOURN asked. Nora frowned, looking out the window at the gray water of the lake. About a week before the fire, Mrs. Bennett came in. She was alone. She told us Arthur was too ill to drive and needed to review his documents. She asked for the original will. And you gave it to her? We weren't supposed to, Nora said, but she was so convincing. She was crying. She said he wanted to make sure everything was in order before he went into surgery. I gave her the file. She took it with her. She took the original. I said, and then the office burned down a week later, destroying the copies. Nora looked uncomfortable. I am not saying she started the fire. Dear, that was faulty wiring. Everyone knows that. But it was strange. She never brought the file back, and when I called her about it, she said she had returned it the next day and handed it to the receptionist, but the receptionist never saw it. She stole the will. I said, she destroyed the one document that protected the house. We thanked Nora and drove back to town. The sky was darkening, heavy clouds rolling in over the mountains. We have enough, MOURN said. We have the testimony about the missing will. We have the video of your father. We have the proof of the life insurance theft. I am filing an emergency motion tomorrow morning. I am asking the court to appoint an independent administrator, and I am referring the entire file to the Maple Hollow District Investigations Unit for fraud and elder abuse. You are going to arrest them." I said, "If the district attorney agrees with me, yes." I dropped MOURN off and drove to Briarwood Lane. I needed to pick up some clothes I had left there, and I wanted to check the house one last time before the hearing. I pulled into the driveway. The motion sensor light over the garage didn't click on. I got out of the car. The darkness was absolute. "Claire." I spun around. Derek was standing near the front porch, hidden in the shadow of the overgrown rhododendrons. He stepped into the faint light of the street lamp. He looked wrecked. His shirt was untucked, his hair matted. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Derek," I said, keeping my distance. "Please," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was thin, shaking with a terrifying vulnerability. "Just let me sell it." "No. Claire, you don't understand. They are going to hurt me. They are going to kill me." "Then go to the police." I said, "Turn state's evidence. Tell them about Sable Ridge. Tell them about the money laundering." "I can't," he wailed. "They will kill Mom too. You are already killing her." "Derek," I shouted, "you have turned her into a criminal. You have drained her life savings. You let Dad die of stress. And now you want the house?" "It is just a house," he screamed, stepping closer. "It is just wood. Why do you care? You left. You ran away to the city and left us here to rot." "I didn't run away," I said, my voice steady. "I escaped. I escaped the suffocation of this family. I escaped the expectation that I exist only to fix your mistakes. You are selfish." He spat. "You always were. Miss Perfect, Miss High and Mighty. You think you are better than us? I think I am the only one who isn't stealing from a dead man." I said. He flinched. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the brother I used to know, the boy who taught me how to ride a bike. But that boy was gone, eaten alive by the addiction and the enabling. Just wait a week," he begged, his voice dropping to a whimper. "I have a buyer. Cash. I can pay them off. I can make it all go away. Just drop the injunction. Please, Claire, for the family." I looked at him. "I am doing this for the family. Derek, I am stopping you from erasing Dad's existence." He stared at me for a long moment. Then, his face hardened. The fear remained, but something cold slid over it. A resignation. "Fine," he whispered. "You want to play the hero? Go ahead. See what happens." He turned and walked away into the darkness, disappearing toward the woods behind the house. I watched him go, feeling a deep, aching sadness. He was gone. My brother was gone. I went inside and locked the door. I checked the windows. I felt besieged. The next morning, the day before the hearing, MOURN filed the motion. It was a scorched earth document. It laid out the forgery of the mail forwarding, the theft of the insurance money, the destruction of the will, and the money laundering scheme. It was a nuclear bomb dropped into the quiet legal pond of Maple Hollow. I spent the day at the library, unable to sit still. I felt like I was vibrating that evening. I returned to Briarwood Lane. I had decided to stay there that night. It was my house. I wasn't going to let them scare me away. I pulled up to the curb. The front door was ajar. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the tire iron from under my seat. I walked up the path, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pushed the door open with my foot. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. I stepped inside. The house hadn't been trashed. It wasn't like the movies where drawers are dumped and furniture is slashed. It was surgical. The cushions on the sofa had been unzipped and felted. The books on the shelves had been pulled out, shaken, and stacked neatly on the floor. The vents had been unscrewed and set aside. Someone had searched the house, systematically, efficiently. I ran to the kitchen. The drawers were open, but the contents were neat. I ran to the study. The desk was clear. I checked my bag. I had the flash drive with me. I had kept it in my purse all day, never letting it out of my sight. But wait, I had made a copy. I had copied the files onto a second drive, a blue one I found in Dad's desk. and I had hidden it, just in case something happened to me. I had taped it to the underside of the dining room table. I ran to the dining room. I dropped to my knees and looked under the table. The tape was there. Peeling back, the blue drive was gone. They had found it. They had searched until they found the leverage. I sat back on my heels, panic rising in my chest. If they had the drive, they knew exactly what I had. They knew I had the video. They knew I had the bank records, but why didn't they take anything else? I looked at the table. On the surface, sitting right in the center, was the letter my father had written to me, the one I had found in the toolbox. Claire, do not trust her. It was sitting there, weighted down by a salt shaker. They hadn't taken it. Why leave the letter? Because it wasn't evidence. It was just words. It wouldn't hold up in court. It was emotional, not legal. The person who did this was a professional. They didn't care about my feelings. They didn't care about the family drama. They cared about the proof. They took the drive because it was the gun that could shoot them. They left the letter because it was just a ghost story. I stood up, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I checked the front door lock. It hadn't been forced. There were no scratches on the deadbolt. They had a key. Derek had a key. Elaine had a key. But the precision of the search, that wasn't Derek. Derek was messy. Derek was emotional. This was the man in the suit, the shark, and he had walked in here using a key. My phone buzzed. It was MOURN. Claire, are you okay? The house was broken into. I said, they took the backup drive. The backup? You still have the original? Yes. It is in my pocket. Good. Get out of there. Go to the sheriff's station. Sleep in the lobby if you have to. Do not stay in that house. I hung up. I looked around the living room one last time. The beige staging chairs, the fake art, the surgical neatness of the violation. I walked over and picked up my father's letter. I folded it and put it in my pocket next to the drive. They thought they had disarmed me. They thought that by taking the copy, they had taken the threat. They didn't know I still had the original, and they didn't know that I was done being afraid. I walked out of the house, leaving the door unlocked behind me. Let them come back. Let them search the empty rooms. I was going to court, and I was bringing the fire with me. The heavy oak doors of courtroom B swung shut behind us, sealing out the hum of the hallway and trapping the stagnant air of judgment inside. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to MOURN, my hands clasped so tightly that my knuckles were white. Across the aisle, Derek sat with a court-appointed lawyer who looked like he had been pulled out of bed 10 minutes ago. Elaine sat in the gallery directly behind Derek, her posture rigid, her face a mask of aggrieved dignity. She thought she had won. I could see it in the way she smoothed her skirt, the way she refused to look at me. She knew the house had been tossed. She knew the blue flash drive was gone. She believed the evidence had been erased, leaving only my word against theirs. All rise. The bailiff droned. Judge Vance entered. He was a man with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen too many family squabbles to be patient with nonsense. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the files before him. "We are here on the matter of the estate of Arthur Bennett," he said. "Motion for emergency injunction and removal of executor. Ms. Holloway, you may proceed." MOURN stood up. She was calm, terrifyingly professional. "Your Honor," she said, "we are moving to strip Mr. Derek Bennett of any authority over this estate. We allege fraud, forgery, conversion of assets, and the destruction of legal documents." Derek's lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Objection. Your Honor, these are baseless accusations from an estranged sister who is unhappy with her share. There is no physical evidence to support these claims." MOURN didn't even look at him. "Your Honor," she said, "we have submitted into evidence a digital forensic copy of a video recording made by the deceased, Arthur Bennett, 2 weeks prior to his death. We have also submitted scanned bank records and the sworn affidavit of Nora Phelps regarding the existence and subsequent theft of the decedent's last will and testament." Derek shifted in his seat. He turned his head slightly, whispering something to his lawyer. The lawyer frowned. I thought you said there was no evidence. The lawyer whispered loud enough for me to hear. Derek looked back at Elaine. Her face hadn't changed, but her fingers were gripping the back of the bench in front of her. MOURN continued. The defense may be under the impression that the physical drive stolen from Ms. Bennett's home last night was the only copy. It was not. We uploaded the files to a secure cloud server the moment they were discovered. She pressed a button on the console. The monitors in the courtroom flickered to life. My father's face appeared. I heard a gasp from the gallery. It was Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor. She had come to watch the drama. The video played. My father's wheezing voice filled the room, echoing off the high ceilings. He spoke of the debts. He spoke of the collection runs. He spoke of the pressure to sell the house to wash the money. They want to turn our home into a laundromat. His voice whispered. I told them no. I watched Derek. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the table, his face draining of color until he looked like a corpse. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Judge Vance took off his glasses. He looked at Derek. Mr. Bennett, the judge said. His voice was very quiet. Do you have an explanation for this? Derek stood up. He opened his mouth, and for a second, I thought he was going to scream. His face twisted into a snarl, a flash of the violence he had shown me in the driveway. It is a lie, he shouted. She manipulated him. Sit down, the judge barked. The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Derek froze. He slumped back into his chair. This court has heard enough, Judge Vance said. Based on the evidence presented, I am granting the injunction. I am freezing all assets of the estate immediately. I am removing Derek Bennett as putative executor. He turned to the clerk. I am appointing an independent administrator to take possession of the estate and conduct a forensic audit. Furthermore, given the nature of the allegations in the video regarding money laundering and organized crime, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation. At the word criminal, Derek went still. The rage evaporated, replaced by a terrifying clarity. He realized, in that moment, that he wasn't just losing the house, he was losing his freedom. He flicked his eyes toward Elaine. It was a quick, desperate look, a child looking to his mother for the answer. What do I do? Fix this. But Elaine didn't move. She stared straight ahead, her eyes glassy. She was cutting him loose. I saw it happen. She was retreating into her fortress of denial, and there was no room in there for him. The court is in recess, Judge Vance said, as the judge stood to leave. A man in a gray suit walked through the swinging doors of the courtroom. He carried a briefcase and looked like an accountant who enjoyed firing people. Your Honor, if I may, the man said. Judge Vance paused. Who are you? I am Robert Whitmore, the court-appointed administrator from the county panel. I was alerted to this hearing this morning. I have done a preliminary title search on the property in question. Judge Vance sat back down. Go on. There is a new development. Mr. Whitmore said. He pulled a document from his briefcase. A lien was filed against the property on Briarwood Lane 3 days before Arthur Bennett's death. A lien? MOURN asked. From who? Crownstead Capital Solutions. Mr. Whitmore said. It is a collateralized loan for $80,000, secured by the equity in the home. The paperwork claims Arthur Bennett signed it. My father never signed that. I said, standing up. Mr. Whitmore looked at me. The signature is currently under review. However, what is significant is the address of the creditor. Crownstead Capital Solutions lists its mailing address as P.O. Box 412, Maple Hollow Station. I felt the air leave my lungs. P.O. Box 412, MOURN said. That is the same box Elaine Bennett used for the mail forwarding. That is correct. Mr. Whitmore said. It appears the entity holding the debt on the house shares a mailing address with the decedent's wife. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Vance looked at Elaine. Mrs. Bennett, he said, do you have a connection to Crownstead Capital Solutions? Elaine stood up. She looked small, frail, and utterly cornered. I don't know what that is, she whispered. The judge narrowed his eyes. The district attorney will find out. In the meantime, no one is to enter that property. The locks are to be changed by the sheriff within the hour. We walked out of the courtroom into the bright, blinding sunlight of the courthouse steps. The relief I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt a heavy, grinding nausea. Elaine was waiting for us by the fountain. She wasn't crying anymore. She was adjusting her gloves, pulling the leather tight over her fingers. "Mom," I said. She looked up. Her eyes were cold. "You think you won?" She said. "I saved the house." I said. "You destroyed the family." She countered. "You destroyed it the minute you signed that change of address form." I said. "Crownstead Capital? Really? You created a fake company to put a lien on your own husband's house?" "I did what I had to do," she hissed. Stepping forward, the facade of the grieving widow cracked, revealing the iron-willed operator beneath. "Your father was stubborn. He wouldn't listen to reason. Derek needed money. The people he owes. They don't file lawsuits. Claire, they break kneecaps. I tried to get Arthur to take a loan. He refused. So I created a way to access the equity without him knowing." "You forged his name on a loan document?" I asked. "I was going to pay it back," she insisted. "Once Derek hit a streak, or once we sold the condo, it was a bridge loan. I was handling it." "And the funeral money?" I asked. "The $50,000? "Derek had an emergency," she said, waving her hand as if $50,000 was pocket change. "He needed to make a good faith payment to the lodge. I took the insurance money to keep him safe. I figured the house sale would cover the funeral later." "You stole from a dead man to pay a casino." I said. "I stole from my husband to save my son," she shouted. "That is what a mother does. You wouldn't understand. You are cold. Claire, you have always been cold. You care more about bricks and wood than flesh and blood." I looked at her. I realized she actually believed it. In her twisted moral universe, enabling Derek's addiction and defrauding her husband was an act of love. Derek walked out of the courthouse then. He looked hollowed out. He stopped a few feet away from us. "The sheriff took my keys," he said dully. "Good," I said. He looked at Elaine. "Mom?" She turned her back on him. "I told you to handle the girl. Derek, I told you to get her to sign. I tried," he whined. "You failed," she said. "And now look at us." She walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement, heading toward her car. She didn't look back. Derek stood there, watching her go. He looked like a balloon that had lost all its air. "She is right," he whispered. "Right about what?" I asked. "I failed," he said. He looked at me, and his eyes were wet. "But Claire, I didn't write the will, and I didn't write the loan papers. I know." I said. "Mom did." "No." He said. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Not Mom. She isn't smart enough to incorporate a shell company like Crownstead. She isn't smart enough to draft a lien that passes a title search. Then who?" "Someone at Sable Ridge," he said. "They gave me the templates. They gave Mom the paperwork to sign. They told us exactly what to say in court." "Who at Sable Ridge?" "I don't know his name," Derek said. "They call him the consultant. He wears a suit. He told me that if I delivered the house, the debt would be wiped clean. He said they needed the property for expansion." "Expansion of what?" "I don't know," Derek said. "But Claire, he is not the kind of guy who loses. And now that the judge froze the assets, he is going to be angry." He looked at me with genuine fear. "You should leave town. Claire, go back to the city. Let the lawyers handle it. Don't go back to the house." "Why?" "Because they know you have the proof," he said, "and they don't care about the law." He turned and walked toward the bus stop. He didn't have his truck anymore. The bank had probably repossessed it, or maybe he had sold it and gambled the proceeds. He looked small and pathetic. A man who had been eaten alive by his own weakness. I watched him go. Then I turned to Marin. "I need to go to the house," I said. "Claire." "No," Marin said. "The sheriff is changing the locks. It is a crime scene. I have a key to the back door." I said, "The one on the original keychain." The sheriff won't have changed it yet. He's probably starting with the front. Why go back? MOURN asked. We won. Because of what Derek said. I replied. Someone gave them the templates. Someone orchestrated this. And my father was a hoarder of information. If he knew about Sable Ridge, he knew about the consultant. I have to look in the crawl space again. But you cleared it, MOURN said. I took the box. I said, but I didn't check the wall behind the box. I drove to Briarwood Lane. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn. The sheriff's cruiser was gone. A bright orange notice was taped to the front door. Do not enter. By order of the probate court. I ignored it. I went around the back, through the garden gate that hung on one hinge. I slipped the key into the back doorknob. It turned. The sheriff hadn't gotten to the deadlock on the mudroom door yet. I slipped inside. The house felt different. It felt empty in a final, terminal way. The spirit of the place had been broken. I went down to the basement. I didn't turn on the lights. I used my phone flashlight. I went to the crawl space. The shelf had been pushed back. But the panel I had unscrewed was leaning against the wall. I crawled in. The dust was thick. I looked at the spot where the lockbox had been bolted to the beam. The wood was scarred and pale where the metal had protected it from years of oxidation. I looked closer at the beam itself. My father was a carpenter. He knew wood. He knew that wood had grain, and knots, and secrets. There was a seam in the beam, a hairline crack that looked like a natural split in the timber. I pulled out my pocket knife. I jammed the blade into the crack and twisted. A block of wood popped out. It was a hollowed-out compartment, masterfully concealed. Inside was a second flash drive. Small, black, wrapped in plastic, the decoy. I whispered, he knew. He knew Derek would find the toolbox eventually. He knew I might find the lockbox, so he put the financial records in the lockbox. The what? But he hid the who in the beam. I put the drive in my pocket and scrambled out of the crawl space. I ran upstairs to the living room. I didn't want to be in the basement anymore. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, and plugged the drive into my phone using an adapter. There was one file, an audio file, meeting_08_2, 4.mp3. August 24th, 1 week before he died. I pressed play. The audio was grainy. It sounded like it had been recorded from inside a pocket or a drawer. I heard my mother's voice. He won't sign it, Elaine said. Her voice was sharp, agitated. He says he wants to leave it to the girl. Then a man's voice spoke. It wasn't Derek. It was a voice I recognized but couldn't place. Smooth, cultured, dangerous. The girl is a problem, the man said. But problems can be solved. If Arthur won't sign, we need to bypass him. How? Elaine asked. We file the lien, the man said. We trigger the default clauses. We force the sale through the debt. But we need a receiver on the inside. Someone to intercept the notices. I can do that, Elaine said. I handle the mail. Good, the man said. And the husband? He is weak, Elaine said. The disdain in her voice made my stomach churn. His heart is barely pumping. A little more stress and nature will take its course. I clapped my hand over my mouth. Make sure Claire stays out of it, Elaine said. If she comes back, she asks questions. Then we close before she learns what really happened, the man said. We close on the 15th. If she interferes, well, accidents happen in old houses. The recording ended. I sat there in the dark, the silence ringing in my ears. It wasn't just fraud. It wasn't just theft. It was a conspiracy to commit murder. My mother hadn't just watched him die. She had discussed the timeline with a man who viewed my father's death as a business transaction. She had redirected the mail not to protect him, but to accelerate the stress that killed him. And the man's voice. Accidents happen in old houses. I stood up. I needed to get to MOURN. I needed to get to the police. This drive was the final nail. I walked to the front window to peek out. Checking for neighbors. A car was parked across the street. It wasn't a neighbor's car. It was a black sedan. Engine idling. The headlights were off. but the parking lights cast a sinister amber glow on the wet pavement. I couldn't see the driver. The windows were tinted dark, but I knew who it was. It was the consultant, the man from the gala, the man on the tape. He wasn't leaving. He was waiting. He knew I was inside. He knew I had found the crawl space. I looked at the "Do Not Enter" sign flapping on the glass, illuminated by the sweep of headlights from a passing truck. The legal battle was over. I had won the paper war. But as I stood in the empty shell of my father's legacy, clutching the evidence that would send my mother to prison, I realized the real war had just begun. The car sat there, idling, a metal beast waiting for its prey to break cover. I gripped the flash drive. Let them wait. I thought, I'm not the same girl who left this town. I turned away from the window and walked back into the darkness of the house, ready to make my next move. Thank you so much for listening to At My Dad's Funeral. My brother announced he'd sell our family home to pay his gambling debts. This story of betrayal, family secrets, and the fight for justice has been a journey, and I hope you were on the edge of your seat until the very end. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please drop a comment below with your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to hit that subscribe button for the Revenge Stories channel. We have many more tales of justice and retribution coming your way. And don't forget to share your thoughts on Claire's decision in the comments. What would you have done in her shoes? Until next time, stay safe and watch your mailbox.